Hello, everybody. Welcome to Lunch and Lore. I'm Tormented by Gnomes. Joining me is my friend and the co-creator of Anacra, NinjaManMat. Matt, how you doing?
Pretty darn good, man. I'm having a nice day so far.
Yeah, our system was slightly haunted a moment ago, which is in keeping with the spirit of the season. So thank you, everyone, for your patience.
Yes,
It
that
got,
actually is pretty apropos for today.
yeah, it got pretty spooky. All right, so today we are talking about the underworld, primarily because it's, again, apropos, and we've been trying to sort of move through the various kingdoms of Anacra in order to cover their different important aspects and so forth. So what do we want to cover about the underworld? We can talk a little bit about what it is, though I feel like we've talked some about that on previous Lunch and Lores. I think I want to talk about how it works. I think we want to talk about the different realms and domains, infernal and otherwise. We want to talk about the wellspring. I definitely want to talk about why you need a golden bough to visit there. And I
Yes,
want to talk about the Kingdom of Shadows. What are some things that you want to talk about with regards to the underworld?
I think you pretty much covered it. I think what I'd like to do is, especially if we get into the general things that you discussed, if
Hmm.
we do more specifics, like how you mentioned in your tweet, we talked about the Adamant Gates, the Charnel Hound,
Hmm.
the Sage, that is, like quest,
Tiresias.
like things that if you would go to the underworld, why would you go there? Why would any mortal being want to head down
Hmm.
to the underworld? They don't belong there. There's terrifying things down there. And aside from, of course, giving information as to what it is, I think I'd like to dive into what sorts of creatures and why would you want to even go down there in
Hmm.
the first place.
All right, so let's start out with the role that the underworld plays in the Four Kingdoms, especially before Ramius changed everything.
Yeah.
The underworld it represents the stage of renewal in the cycle: birth, life, death, and renewal. The underworld is where everything arrives after it's done with its current iteration of the cycle. It's gone through birth, life, and death. It's passed through death, whether it be physical material undergoing decay, elemental energy that's been expended or broken down, life energy, souls, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Things go up into the world, they live, they decay, they die, they go back into the underworld, and the underworld is where they get reprocessed and purified so that they can be used again in the next iteration of the cycle. So before Ramius turned it into the land of the dead, the underworld served as the wellspring of the elements. So yeah, the Great Recycling Center. That's a good point, Chad.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
the elements would flow up from the underworld like a wellspring or like a root tap drawn up into the mortal world in order. And so if the world of Anacra does not have the classical elemental planes as places you can visit, the closest that you could get is the underworld. Because if you actually visit the elemental well springs, you're going to find a realm of pure air, a realm of pure water, some places where they sort of mix and tumble together. But those otherworldly environments that you normally encounter on the inner planes are all at the heart of the underworld. So that's where your elementals come from. For the most part, the creatures you're going to see in the wellspring are not genies and salamanders and the other sort of elementals that look like people and talk and act like creatures. You will have some of those down there, but the deeper you get into the well springs, the more abstract things get.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're more likely to find your absolute incarnations of elemental fire, your very alien, non-human entities down there. And that was its original purpose, and it also served that purpose for life energy. So before the death of Arakura, creatures would die, their life energy would disseminate back into the underworld, it would be reprocessed, and then when a new creature was born, that lifeblood, that energy would be poured into their body in order to inhabit them so that they could have a life. And for the most part, it wasn't direct one-to-one reincarnation. If you died, there are very few circumstances under which your identity would be reborn.
Yes, exactly.
Ooh, beg your pardon. I'm only on one cup of coffee.
I was gonna say, how's that coffee treating you?
It's still crossing the blood-brain barrier. So
Yeah.
what is more likely is that when you die, what compose you, your elements, etc. Our bodies become the grass. We're all connected in the great circle of life. But the same thing with the positive energy that gave you life and imbued you with vital energy.
Yes.
That's going to be disseminated amongst multiple new creatures. It's just going to go back into the pool and then mix around with everything else, lose any sort of individuality, and just be used to infuse new life forms afterwards.
Yeah, I kind of feel like we discussed this when especially we made a comparison to the underworld being the great recycling center for souls. And that was definitely how it exactly was before Ramius kind of
Mm-hmm.
shut things up incredibly.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I feel like we talked a lot about how the underworld is a lot of pools. I mean, of course, there's everything down there. There's dank caves. You've got endless, plains. Well, not endless, but seemingly endless plains. There's all sorts of topography and things that are going on down there. But we talked about how when it's almost like the whether it be abstract or not, when you die, you join the ferryman and then you cross through maybe not the river Styx, but you cross through the waves of water, the winds of air, the fires, and then finally settle into the earth before you're reborn. I feel like going through these elemental nodes, going through the
Mm-hmm.
planes cleanses your soul and purifies you and gets you ready. Like you said, it erases everything that you were. And fundamentally, you're still made. It's almost like in a way taking dough, and if you're trying to just do this process where if you drop it on the floor and you're like, oh man, I got dirt and crud and little bits of stuff all over in it, and you're like, I have to start all over, and rather than just throwing it away and making a new one, you go through, you sift it, you pick the stuff out, you cook it up, and finally you've got bread, and you're like, hey, you can't really tell if this was dropped on the floor anymore, everything seems
Mm-hmm.
fine,
But it's not
aside
like
from the
that particular cookie shaped lump it's going to be a new cookie. You're going to be part of a loaf or part of a donut or something like that.
exactly.
Yeah.
That was one thing I wanted to cover with you, is that
Mhm.
do you have souls that just this soul is now this soul, or is it recycled to the point where souls get mixed amongst each other? Like the souls themselves are mostly just life energy, if you will, where these
I
things are broken down and remade into other new souls.
it's common in some cosmologies to differentiate between soul and spirit, and I think in our case, god damn it, you've got spirit, which is like spiritual energy, vital energy, but soul is identity. And I think that in most cases, but not all cases, at least under the original model, soul was not preserved. Soul was melted down. You achieved oneness with the universe, and then elements of your identity or soul would become parts of other creatures. But once you return to the great primordial soup, you don't just get the exact, like I said, it's not like the exact same volume of liquid gets dumped into another creature. It's now stirred and mixed with a bunch of other stuff. So I think that under most circumstances, as a default, identity is not preserved. We had a couple of
Oh,
questions from chat,
absolutely.
but go ahead if you had a
Oh,
thought
I was
first.
just going to say, I think that's one of the reasons why in Anacra, it's not that we don't have resurrection, magic and whatnot. We've made it clear that it's very difficult. Like, if you die and before a minute passes, someone drops a revive on you. If someone can do something to
Mm-hmm.
immediately bring you back, from the dead, that's one thing. But once your soul starts recycling, it gets a point where if enough time has passed, there's no original. Yes, you can technically bring a fragment of that soul back, but there really is, after a certain point,
There's no you
that
left.
soul, there's no you left. There's no way that you can, even if you were able to get the ritual together and get the materials
Mm-hmm.
and be in a place to do it, that soul's long gone. You would have to find a way to either preserve or put that soul into stasis. Everybody give Joe a hand. He's been working very hard on his other shows, and he is burning that midnight oil. So don't worry about the.
Thank you.
These are yawns of glory and power. And yeah, let's go ahead and take those other questions around.
All right, so is the recycling of energy system automated, or are there beings, entities responsible for enacting it? So right now in my head, I'm thinking that it's a built-in part of the process. It is hard-coded into the universe that this is how things work. And it's not like there is, someone responsible for executing that function. Now, that is what we're describing is still the core functionality of the underworld, but ever since the death of Anacra and the ascension of Ramius, a lot of stuff has been stacked on top of that functionality that changes things, and that has a lot more entities involved in it, so we're going to get into that in a moment. But by default, souls and life energy automatically are purified by the elements, reconstituted. Like, that's just, again, built into the mechanics of the world itself. That's the way that the world works. Those are natural forces at work.
I agree. I do have an amendment. I feel like, much like we discussed last time, where there are, where with celestials or other beings that are coded into a system and they have a particular role. I feel like there are wardens, or there are entities that reside in the underworld, kind of like how we described the ferryman thing. There are entities that are there to ensure that you're kind of on the right path. I feel like it
Mhm.
is much like if you were going down an assembly line, it goes through, but much like with an assembly line, you have people to make sure that stuff doesn't just fall off and, roll away, wander away, whatever. You've got things in place that even if the system itself, there's an anomaly, I believe there are things that try to make sure that it all stays within the realm of where it needs to be. You know what I mean?
The
Especially
question
with Ramius in charge.
I was going to say the question is how old are those entities? Because it does tend Anacra tends to have a lot of autonomous processes that are just, again, it's like gravity. That's just how it's the laws of physics. And you are more likely to have entities responsible for safeguarding or monitoring that process rather than being the ones who execute that process. But I also
Yes.
think that, again, the system was largely automated with maybe a couple of
Absolutely.
entities before Ramius came along. Like,
Oh, I would even go forward to say, sorry for cutting you off. I would even venture forth that when things were as the sovereigns themselves were pushing for, it was probably almost entirely automated with maybe
mhm,
only a couple titans just keeping an eye on things.
mhm,
I think once Ramius and Rialta and other powerful entities that decided that, hey, we need some more order and guidance in the world, they set things in place to ensure that things don't go wrong or happen. But the
mhm.
sovereigns themselves are all about just all this very this is going to sound wrong, but this very lawful chaos. Let things go how they are, but we do have rules in place. You know what I mean?
It's the clockmaker model of creation, where you set up the system and then you just let it tick. That was the original idea, but people kept on coming in and trying to, pull out all the copper and remove the gears from the clock, and so now they have to have people monitoring it. So that was the original system, and the underworld at that time really was this sort of primal elemental place. It wasn't this system of caves, and I don't think it had a lot of the, what am I trying to think? It was like not an expansion pack, but like a skin put onto a gaming model. It was very much just operating purely on code. It was, you had the elements down there, you had the life force passing through. You didn't have these weird, spooky caves and like all this, all these textures and stuff. It was just right down to the core
Oh
primal
yeah.
energy.
I mean,
Until,
because the
go ahead.
underworld was a very different place. Oh, I was gonna say the underworld was a very different place before Ramius,
Hmm.
changed the world.
Yeah. So it was just the furnace. It was just the machine room, incredibly bright and powerful, cosmic, ineffable machine room of the universe. Then Uzul drives a blade forged from blood iron through the heart of the Avatar of Earth, discorporating Arakura, and then the Infernals start to reign over the world. The underworld didn't change a whole lot during this time. Uh, it was still just sort of doing its thing. The only difference
But it was
was
it was it was busy.
it was busy. Business
Real
was
busy.
booming. Uh, but although I think that a lot of the life energy that should have been siphoned down there, whenever you sacrifice somebody to, let's say, a demon, or an infernal or something, I think I'm not sold on souls. I'm pretty firm in where whenever I can in my cosmologies, I like to make it so that magic cannot steal your soul, because the soul, the final destination of the soul, is still adjudicated by individual choice. But I'm not hard sold on that. That's just sort of my general inclination. But your life energy, your spirit, your essence, that's up for grabs. So
So,
most.
for instance, like we were talking about with liches, when if you have a entity that
Mhm,
like traps its soul somewhere, or if you have like let's say a magic sword that traps the souls of your victims in it, we're
mhm.
talking about how it's basically trapping your life energy, but we're not saying that the soul itself is not permitted to move on and rejoin the cycle. Is
I
that what
would
you're saying?
I would argue that you can hold a soul in place. Like you
Okay.
can hold it in place. But you can't eat it, if that makes any sense.
Oh, so
Like,
you're saying that infernals and fiends don't go about eating the souls of individuals.
right, like if you eat somebody's soul, what happens is you consume all their vital energy, their spiritual energy, and if there's anything left of identity, you don't get to keep that. Unless there's some way for you to eventually be killed. Souls can melt down and return to the cosmos, or they can be held in place. But you can't damn somebody who didn't commit acts of evil. You can't hold somebody's soul and torment them forever, but you can imprison them and feed off of their energy, sort of thing. Uh,
Yeah, you would prolong their life and prolong their suffering, and then once
mhm,
they receive the release of death, yeah, it was horrible, but their soul gets to return to the foundry.
right.
Uh, I really I agree with that. I
Hmm.
also feel like if there ever was a possibility where you could mangle a soul so much that it either would be just made null, because
Hmm.
again, like with the transfers of energy, you can't just create or destroy it. It has to just keep moving on. I feel like if there ever was a way to just eliminate that energy, it
Hmm.
would be such a null in the world that I don't know. I don't feel like that would be a thing, or if it was, it would be cataclysmic and it would be
Hmm.
definitely coming to the attention of all the powers that be.
Yeah. I mean, for example, one thing I'm thinking of is this is largely in response to a certain campaign that you and I are running, Baldur's Gate Ascent into Avernus. In the Forgotten Realms cosmology, there's a lot of ways to steal a soul, and you can end
Yeah.
up in hell even if you were a good person,
Oh
which
yeah.
doesn't sit well with me personally. Even though like good things can happen to or bad things can happen to good people, that's a part of life. Uh, so it's something I'm still sort of honing down on. Recycling back to our previous point, during the demonic imperium, a lot of that vital energy was being consumed by the infernals to make themselves stronger. And again, that's what happens when you sacrifice somebody, is that their vital their vital energy doesn't get recycled. Their vital energy gets redirected to whoever you sacrifice them to. They can feed on that. They can become stronger.
So then what does that mean for the soul then, is what we're getting at? Does it directly affect the soul in any meaningful way? Or is it just this person likely would have lived, a good long life, and you are cutting that short and just taking
Mhm.
all of that energy that would have been spent for that life and putting it to yourself?
Yeah, I think in most cases, if you kill somebody on an infernal altar, their suffering ends. It's not like, haha, now you will suffer for all eternity because I sacrificed you. Like, their suffering ends, their identity blacks out or dissipates, or drifts down to the underworld and doesn't really have a nucleus of spiritual energy around it. But again, it's not in pain. Like, that soul's problems are over, but all the vital energy, the spiritual energy that would have been recycled into the underworld gets redirected.
Oh yeah. And I feel like, again, even though we're talking on a very cosmic level about this, it's not like Joe Farmer knows that, hey, when I die, it doesn't matter if I killed 10 kids or if I was a saint, I'm going to just get recycled and thrown back into the void. So I don't care. The
Hmm.
regular person, even I would say even most people likely don't know that that's the case and that there's no final judgment per se.
Hmm.
It's I think in a lot of ways kind of similar to us. We have a lot of in Anacra, there's a lot of whether it be faiths or at least just personal beliefs
Hmm.
that drive you to either want to do good or do bad. Uh, that being said, I feel like if you are really truly pursuing, again, like we talked about, especially with the way things are in a more modern Anacra, post Ramius going crazy with everything,
Hmm.
uh, you're going to Ramius. That's just default. That's how things are, unless you have a petition from a power that you would. And I feel like if you were professing that you were a follower of Ziliar and you were trying to do good wherever you were and you were being courageous and heroic, and then you died and you know everything is just poop for you, you're like, whoa, that sucks. But that's not a thing that happens. You'll have, if you're good enough, this person will come to bat for you, and there may
Hmm.
be more for you than just going back into the pool and being recycled, you
Yeah,
know?
and I think that this is very much the result of the post-Ramius world. But
Yes.
there are alternative afterlives, and one of the ways that religions get started is if people are like, I don't want to just get recycled into soup. I
Yeah.
like me. I like being me. I want to keep being me. Then you get these various religions that will offer different ways to do it, like the Infernals. How do Infernals get followers aside from just manipulating them? They say, hey, your identity can be preserved after death, and it's not necessarily going to be eternal torture. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's not like I'm here to punish you for your sins. That's not what I'm about. I might feed off of your despair and devour your hope because I feed on that and I grow stronger from it, but I'm not punishing you. I'm just doing my thing. So you get
Well, and
infernal.
also you get those promises where, hey, if you fight in my army against Ramius's forces and get me more territory,
Hmm.
maybe I'll make you a bigger and better fiend. You can start making
Hmm.
deals, and who knows, maybe kind of the whole American promise. Like maybe one day you can go from a lowly farmer to being as amazing as I am,
A
and
huge
you too can take over.
industrialist, yes,
Yeah,
with
you can
a
be a huge
small loan
industrialist.
of $1 million.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a great way for Infernals to attract followers, is anyone who doesn't want to become one with the universe. They need some alternative. So and I think that you've got some other alternatives out there. Some people become, instead of being recycled, they might specifically become a forest spirit, right? If they were one with nature. This is very
Yeah.
common for elves, for example. Especially the Huldra. They're likely to come back in the form of a wolf or a tree or a bird. And it could be like, oh, this person became a whole flock of birds, because it's not a one-to-one thing, but some aspect of their personality lives on in their environment. There are alternatives to this. It's generally in the form of broken down and reconstituted, but that reconstitution can take a variety of forms. And if you're in good with some sort of higher power or lower power, your identity may even be preserved. The ways that we've talked about this happening so far on the show, we just mentioned how Infernals can get you. We've also mentioned how Raelta, in a post-Ramius world, can say, hey, would you like to do eternal duty on the front lines of the Outer Dark and be a star? You're going to be a star, kid.
You're going to be a star. Well, I could just come back and live a normal life, right? Yeah, but this way you've got pretty wings and a giant glowing sword and you can fly. And it's
also,
like, oh my God,
you won't
amazing.
be you. Like, if you do the other thing, you'll be goo that'll be reconstituted, but you can spend some time, being yourself, but shiny, glowy Super Saiyan yourself if you come along with me. One of the central ideas of the Zalarian religion is it's this phoenix imagery. So they believe in individual reincarnation, which is a thing that I believe can actually happen to true practitioners of the Zalarian way. Where their identity is preserved in some capacity. It's not like they are reborn with all of their knowledge, but their soul, instead of being reconstituted, actually is put into a new body.
It's very Avatar adjacent.
Yeah, exactly. But it only happens for certain cultures with certain belief systems. It's not the default.
And you're not a Super Saiyan when you come back, very likely.
Exactly. You're a baby. So there was another thing. You mentioned a Lich's phylactery. Did you want to elaborate on that?
I think we kind of answered it. I was just making sure that we weren't getting rid of soul trapping in general. I feel like soul trapping in Anacra, considering how dependent souls are, I feel like unless, again, you're an individual that has a mighty need to make your mark, not just on the world, but just within the realm itself. You have a lot of souls that just want to be a part of that cycle. It's an inbred need. And so if you have something, it would be the ultimate punishment to deny that soul the ability to return back in. So I feel like that is not only a thing, but it's kind of within Anacra, like one of the ultimate evils.
Blasphemy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think when I say no soul trapping, what I mean is no unearned eternal damnation.
I completely agree with that. I feel like, again, not just that I don't like it and I don't like the idea of it, and I would personally not want that to happen. I feel like the whole point of it is, and again, not jumping exactly on like, oh, it's like reincarnation and that you're trying to wash yourself out and be a better soul and get to nirvana. But I feel like there's got to be something in Anacra aside from just, hey, this is how it always has been. There needs to be probably a reason why this is happening, and we don't need to delve too deep into it. But it's very likely that regardless if you were a good person, a bad person, or in between, the life force of Anacra, the souls that make up the world, I would have to assume that over time, especially when you have better influences within the world and you have, whether it be heroic individuals or just people with great visionaries that are making things bigger and better for everyone or themselves, there is so many experiences and so much knowledge that is being poured into these souls and so much that's happening. I can't imagine that it's being stripped away from them every time. I feel like the souls themselves are slowly elevating over time. You know what I mean?
I think
I think it would take eons. And I'm not saying that eventually, like, oh, hey, 1,000 years from now, everyone in Anacra is going to be angels and they're going to be this higher power,
super nice to each other. Yeah.
Show me what you got. No, they're not going to be getting to that point. But I mean, maybe one day.
I think that's a major point of theological debate in Anacra itself. I think there's some people who believe that like the point of the universe is to evolve and to grow wiser over time. And there are others who think that there is no point, and there's others who think that, it's just turning and turning and turning and never moving anywhere. So I think that's a good mystery to leave, and it's a good hope to leave open.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about the overhaul, the changes that occurred. So I mentioned that Anacra dies, and the Infernals basically rule most of the mortal world for almost a millennium, not quite a millennium.
Yeah. A long time.
Several centuries. During that time, Ramius, the son of Anacra, who was responsible for dipping out the blood of life, vital energy, essentially, into new beings. He was the cupbearer to the gods. He does not help. Like, all the sovereigns and the titans are scrambling to deal with this new reality where the Infernals rule the world. They're all dealing with it in different ways. They're not particularly united. Ramius goes off on his own to study the source code of the universe, to study the way that the sovereigns put the world together.
Do you think it was in C+ or Python?
I think it was in like COBOL or one of those programming languages that's incredibly clunky. Because somebody asked a while ago, and we might do a whole episode on Ramius at some point. Somebody asked if Ramius was able to banish all the fiends to the underworld by literally editing the source code of the universe, why didn't he just wipe them out or kick them out of Anacra entirely?
I actually have a point for that, unless you were just about to jump on it.
Oh, I've been talking a lot, so let's hear yours first.
I was going to say, I feel like, again, looking at it that way, it's kind of like saying, oh, I opened the key and I got in, I get my wish. What should I wish for? I don't think that's like that. I feel like going through the source code is kind of like, it's like finding your way through a fog, or more so, it's like a door that has 10 locks in it, and you opened one lock and said, thank God I got in here. I finally made it through. I'm able to get through this one lock, and it will open the door to the next level. If you go through all the locks, then you can get to all the doors. Then yeah, you can wish for whatever you want in essence. But I feel like he just, even after 500 or 600, however many years it was, he got in just enough to be able to say, thank God I can do something about this. And he immediately jumped on it. And this was who knows? In my brain of brains, I'm thinking, if that works that way, and again, we haven't gotten into exactly how it does work. I don't even know if we need to know exactly how it does work, but I would think that just by getting in what he got, he didn't get all the knowledge of the universe. He can't make any changes forever he wants. He was able to just get enough done to make this problem not go away, but to punish the fiends that killed his mother, and to make sure that this kind of thing could never happen again. And I think he got exactly what he wanted. He didn't need to do that. And who knows what it would have cost. We don't know the fallout of what he had to do. I'm assuming this wasn't just a freebie thing.
Here's my take on it, and it sort of leads up from your take. Ramius did not discover the equation and become the one with complete control over all reality. Ramius found, so you're playing a game, and the game is really tough, and things have gotten out of control. And you start going through the game files, and you find the DLLs, and you find the INI files, and you start to realize that if you change some variables in those game files, you can actually change your save game, or like change the rules and do cheats. You're starting to do modding. Unfortunately, there's no guide on how to do this on the internet, and the programming language is not one that you're familiar with. So you end up like messing with this code, and then you try a couple of different little experiments with new save games and such, and you realize that you accidentally, turned off clipping, and now everyone's falling through the universe and nothing works at all. And you keep on messing with things, and you never develop a full understanding. It's not like it's not like you could build the game from scratch, but eventually you learn, if I change this variable here, I can do this. And if I change this variable, I can do this. I think changing this variable would give me infinite lives, but when I do that, it also makes the game crash on loading. But if I just set this to an arbitrarily high number instead of an infinite number, then the game successfully loads and I have infinite lives. But I don't really understand what I'm doing. So I feel like Ramius got in there, did enough reading and looking through to kind of figure out some of the patterns, and figured out how to safely set it so that fiends had to be shunted to the underworld. But he couldn't get much further than that, because if he did, he risked making the world non-functional, or his changes would just be rejected. So it is very much like what you were
exactly just negated. If you overreach, it's like, okay, you get nothing now. Have a nice day.
Yeah. So it's like it's going off of that same idea that you said with different keys and stuff, but rather than it being like, oh, he's only unlocked the first lock and there's 10 locks, it's like Ramius understands this better than anyone else does, and he barely understands it. And everyone looks up to Ramius as this like master of esoteric secret knowledge, but in reality, Ramius has barely scraped the surface.
Kind of combining what we were saying, it almost feels like everybody in the game is an NPC, and in the game of Anacra, and Ramius figured out how to be a player, and he unlocked the skill tree. There's all these different paths that you can take, and he's found out how to get to the first tier, and he's like, I can see it up there, but oh my gosh, there are so many paths I have to take and so many things I have to do to get there. And
And there's no
it just
strategy guide.
there's no strategy guide. It does. I don't know. I don't even know what I am. Like you said, he knows it better than anybody. He's the only one who really
Mhm.
has the idea of what's going on there. And even then, it's almost kind of like as he starts reaching for a possibility, it starts moving away from him.
Yeah.
There's like these roots that go out, and he's looking for a possibility. He's trying to grasp at it and trying to find it. And every time he starts moving down a path, the root dries up and withers, and he has to go to
Mhm.
a different path to find it. So I like you said, with a combination of whether it be locks or firewalls or just trying to figure out what's going to work in the code, he was only able to get this far through years and years and centuries of learning and practice and isolation.
And he did a lot of
And
experiments, right? So like this
oh yeah,
result that he finally arrived at was like, look, I've tried doing other things and I probably could like blow up one of the Infernals by doing this, but it would also destroy the universe or cause massive corruption to the code. Like this is, I've, after millions and millions of attempts, this is the one that I know I can execute safely. It's not the Doctor Strange only one way that we win.
I was just gonna make a comment.
It's
Yeah.
not that. It's just like, this is what I know I can accomplish and I know will help solve our problem.
It's almost kind of like, again, making other pop culture reference. It's almost like trying to go back in time and kill Hitler. You know, you never know exactly what is going to change, if anything, or how drastically things are going to be
Mhm.
different. You might go, "Oh, I'm going to go back and kill Hitler," and then you end up with the Flashpoint paradox, where Wonder Woman and Aquaman are fighting, and you're like, "This is not the world that I wanted. This cannot go through. This is not going to
Exactly.
work."
It's like, because of the way that you did it, you've accidentally created Super Hitler.
Because you're basically cheating. You're not
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
going through in life and doing it. You're breaking through the rules of
Mhm.
the cosmos of this world and saying, "Hey, what if this?" And it happens.
Right. And again, if you are trying to do a speed run of a game, you exploiting glitches and stuff, sometimes you can sequence break and the game will be like, oh, you skipped this quest, but this quest doesn't require this other quest in order to work, so it'll
Yeah,
still work. But sometimes if you sequence break, you get your game in an unplayable state and
exactly.
shit gets weird.
Likewise, I feel like there needs to be some kind of cost for doing that. Not saying there has to be like an equivalent
Mhm.
exchange thing, but it would beg the question now, after being so many hundreds of years or even thousands since then, why hasn't he tried it again? And I think the reason is that there needs to be some kind of cost associated with it.
Mhm.
And or once you've done it, that's it. It's like a bungled wish spell. Once you've done it,
Mhm.
that's it. You get one try. And he still has all his knowledge. He still knows how to do it, but he's like gimped from playing with it like that anymore. Like for
Right.
instance, with Wish, you could never cast Wish again. He still has his ninth level spell slot, but he can't use it for messing with the code again. Something like that, you know?
I think that it takes an immense amount of energy to make the change. It's not just a notepad file where you just go in. Like if you're time traveling, you have to create, one, this incredible scientific advancement, and two, you need an incredible energy source. It's also possible that the tablets can't withstand too much editing, or they become resistant to too much editing, right? After a certain point. I also think, while we want to leave some of it mysterious because it is one of the greatest achievements in the world, one of the most esoteric modifications to reality that's ever occurred, part of what Romulus gave up was his own identity, because he was like the
Yep.
cupbearer to the gods, this sort of almost Hermes, beautiful, natural figure, and now he's the king of shadows, and he's almost emotionless.
Yeah.
He gave up a lot of who he was. It's like the original, again, going back to code, just because this is how I think of it, you've got this really well programmed, fleshed out character who he was. He
I know what you're gonna say.
he adjusted his role to be like, I'm going to change myself to be this character, but that didn't include all the variables of personality and like, vivacity and all that stuff. So he comes across in the underworld as robotic, like does not compute, but just like, this is my purpose and I am locked into this purpose, because he
You know
couldn't,
what it
he
reminds
didn't.
me of?
What does it remind you
Oh,
of?
no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
It's like he couldn't create, when he created a custom class for himself, he didn't know how to do it completely, and so he just
Yeah.
gave himself these superpowers. But if you read his character backstory, bio, etc., and like his character has no scripted interactions with any other characters, so he's just
He
this
filled in
sort
his
of
numbers. He didn't give himself an ideal, a
Yeah.
bond, or any of that stuff. He didn't give himself the crunch or the backstory. It's just, here's my numbers and here's what I
It
do.
wasn't on purpose. It's just that stuff is so complicated. He never mastered how to do that stuff, and so he
Yeah.
lost a lot of who he was.
I was gonna say it's like booting up your computer in safe mode. He's an
Mm-hmm.
admin in safe mode. He doesn't have his desktop background. He doesn't have any of his real programs. He's this like he's this very detached, just
Mm-hmm.
admin form of who he was.
Yeah.
He literally is just there again, like we talked about. He's the warden. He made himself the
Mm-hmm.
warden of the underworld to make sure that he could keep these horrible things trapped down there and make sure that the cycle could keep flowing despite the
Mm-hmm.
fact that these that he basically he effectively terraformed and doomed the underworld to being a place of evil instead of being the
Yeah.
recycling foundry that it was.
Which is a great transition for us to stop talking about how he did it and to start talking about what he did. So, Ramius changed himself and he changed the world in the following ways. The way that everyone immediately noticed was that Infernals and Fiends could no longer exist outside of the underworld, or rather, they were bound to the underworld. So, the moment he executed this change, all fiends that were not in the underworld were forcibly sucked into the ground. Sometimes like they left behind their bones and their goo as they were just like squished into the stones themselves, and their essence was dragged screaming into the underworld, leaving behind these horrific corpses. And also it was an excruciatingly painful experience for them as they were dragged into the underworld. The other thing that he did was he changed the cycle of he added extra steps to the cycle, where now instead of souls immediately passing through the elements to be purified, souls go through him. Souls enter the underworld. And he added on this like extra, instead of it just being this pure elemental core of energy in the wellspring of the elements, now he has his kingdom, because he knew he was dragging the Infernals down here into sort of this empty, unused space of the underworld, which for the most part, the underworld looks like underground caverns, is how I usually imagine it. So the Infernals,
With those rivers that are flowing through them and stuff like that, except the
yes.
rivers are literal fire and avalanches of
Mhm.
earth and stuff like that.
So when he dragged them all down there into these areas, one, they were traumatized and, turned into screaming piles of hideous goo. But they did eventually have time to carve out new territories for themselves. So the Infernals established their domains. And each infernal domain it's like a pocket dimension. It's not infinite, but the stronger the infernal, the more control they have over what it's like. So if you're running an Anacra game, in the underworld, that's where you put your 9 hells, the abyss. It's not like you can go into the underworld in my campaign, at least. You can't visit the underworld and be like, oh, here's the entire 9 hells of Baator stacked up on top of each other. It's more like if I wanted to put a location from the 9 hells in my world, I would make it a domain in Anacra. Like I'd make Avernus a separate infernal domain. And then I would put, the city of Dis over here. I would sort of scatter every single layer of a plane as a separate pocket plane scattered across the underworld itself.
In my idea for this, and again, it's very similar to yours, if not exactly,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like you would see, for instance, as you're in, the realm of Ramius and you're moving through the gray waste, the mist that we talked about that separate
Mm-hmm.
the different regions, and as you're moving through, you'll see this area that across from you, there's this cavern and there's these pillars of fire raining down from it. And you see this giant, horrible city, and you know that in this corner, in this pocket of the underworld, that's the realm of Ulzul. And you're like, oh, that doesn't look so big. That's not so bad. And as you approach it, it kind of does this almost like video game style loading screen, where as you're walking, you realize that as you're walking
It renders more and more.
You're not getting any closer. You're not getting any
Mm-hmm.
closer. And it just expands out before you. And you didn't literally walk through a portal, but just by getting close to it, it sucked you into what it actually was.
Mm-hmm.
And then you move through, and now you are in this, like, you see that there's the citadel, and then there's just rows and rows and rows, and it keeps going, and it goes down, 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 and you can't even fathom how.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it does have an ending, but it's one of those things that if you're immortal, your mortal mind just breaks by seeing this very Inception style change that goes on.
It's bigger on the inside, and so it's like when you're out in the underworld proper, you've got all these little pocket dimensions that don't unfold for you until you approach or enter them. I like that. That makes sense.
And it's not like you can stand in the middle of the underworld, look around, and just see the whole thing. And then as you get closer, it's still this huge, crazy, immense thing. But like you said, the entities that have scratched out their own existence down there have, in a way, kind of temporally changed the topography down there and have bent it to their will. And I think what you were getting into, like you were saying, when the Infernals, especially, or the other fiends that were dragged down there, started, they had to spend a lot of time reforming, because, like you said, they were just utterly annihilated on their way down. Gave Ramius enough time to build up his kingdom, gather his forces, because what he really does with when you die, and unless, now again, and at first there probably wasn't very many, if any,
alternatives.
alternatives or petitioners. In time, you've got other great beings that have said, you know what, I don't know if I like my followers just going down and serving in your, in your
Hmm.
infinite, I mean, because really, in a way, the war between Ramius and the Infernals is the closest we have to like the Blood War.
Yeah, it
From
really is our replacement. So we need to talk a little bit more about that after you finish this thought.
I was just getting into just
Mm-hmm.
saying that he would claim them. They come to him, and it kind of like it's almost like they go through that same process of being torn down and rebuilt, but
Mm-hmm.
instead of going through the elemental uh, waves to do it, they're kind of like broken. Like, when you send someone out to war and they come home and they're not the same person, they've gone through horrible experiences, and it's changed them and broke them down, and now they need to do a lot to get back into where they want to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's very similar to that. Of course, eventually Ramius does let them go from their service and they're able to go through, but it's almost like that's like a pre-way to just the entities that enter his service eventually become like him. They're these very shadowed versions of themselves. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean?
Yes. So let's talk about that. First off, the changes to the world. Infernals and fiends were dragged to the underworld. Second, yes. Ramius established himself and he created his own domain, just like the Infernals made their domain. He created his own domain, which is the closest thing you can get to the center of the underworld. The underworld was now also sort of divided into these two different, we'll say layers, but it's more like levels. You've got the cavern level, which is the underworld that most people are familiar with now in Anacra. And again, it's this underground, infinite underground caverns with these infernal domains scattered throughout them. And this land is inimical to the living. It used to be that if you went into the underworld to the elemental wellsprings, the problem was there was a ton of elemental energy there, which is not good for your skin tone. Now the problem is all the dead are directed through this overlayer, this cavern, the underworld as we know it. And that just creates so much negative energy, because if it's all this life force moving in one direction, that if you, a mortal, go to this place, your life force gets caught up in the momentum, it ebbs out of you, and you start to die. That's why you need a golden bow. A golden bow holds that at bay, draining the golden bow, which is full of vital energy, instead of you, which gives you time to run around the underworld doing your business. So Ramius established this mode. He said, all souls now pass through me before they go to the wellspring so the wellspring is still there, that system is still there, but first they have to go through me. Why? Because Ramius knew the Infernals were not defeated. They were just imprisoned. And he knew that they were going to work to find ways to get around him, because one thing he could not patch out when he adjusted the Emerald Tablets was mortal agency. Mortal magic can still summon the Infernals to the mortal realm.
Yes.
Like, sovereigns and infernals and other supernatural powers cannot, but mortals can. So the only hope that infernals and fiends have of getting back to the mortal world is by influencing mortals to assist them. And how do you create these big fancy dominions in the underworld? You need vital energy to do it. You can't just be like, I'm an infernal and I'm gonna, like, yeah, Uzul upon arrival was able to carve out a little domain for himself, but in order to expand it and to grow his underworld empire, he needed more souls. He needed more vital energy, which is another reason why the Infernals like sacrifices, and they like, luring people to their domains upon death. Not just to turn them into more soldiers for their armies, but also like, well, I need to put, I want to put in an observatory and a nice pool room on my pad, so I'm going to need more souls in order to pull that off. So, what Ramius did was he established what's known as the Kingdom of Shadows, which is his domain at the very heart. When people die by default now, instead of passing through the elements and being purified, stripped down, and recycled into the universe, they instead pass through the 5 rivers of the underworld. And these rivers are designed to accomplish exactly what Matt was talking about earlier, where it strips them of their mortal emotions and concerns and prepares them to serve in Ramius's army.
I remember this one all too well.
Yes, we've done adventures here before. And these are all pulled straight from Greek mythology. You've got Acheron, the river of pain. It's a river of sweat. So that basically, the soldiers, they're not affected by pain once they die. You pass through the river Acheron, all the pain is, and your life's pain and your ability to experience pain are stripped away from you. Phlegethon, the river of fire. It's purification of just like your mortal essence. So you're hollowed out and turned into a shell. Cocytus, the river of sorrows, is a river of pure tears. You get rid of your ability to feel sorrow, grief, distress, all that stuff. Lethe, the river of oblivion, it's a river of sweet nectar. It strips you of all your memories. And then Styx is the river of hatred, and it removes any, like, anger, hatred, any of that, personal grudges. So by the time a soul passes through all 5 rivers, they're just like, I am ready to comply. And they arrive at the Kingdom of Shadows. The entrance to the Kingdom of Shadows are the adamant gates.
Yeah.
The huge adamantine doors upon which is carved like the whole story of Ramius' sacrifice, the death of Arakura, so on and so forth. It's guarded by the charnel hound instead of Cerebus, and the charnel hound is made from the bodies of would-be interlopers who have tried to break into the Kingdom of Shadows. It's this sleepless guardian. Once you get inside the Kingdom of Shadows, it's like a mausoleum graveyard empire. It's all made from, white marble. It's very bleached out, grays, blacks, and whites. And it's, troops and armies and forges for Ramius' army, because all these souls are trained to be warriors. They patrol the underworld to look for infernals sneaking around trying to steal life energy or souls. They push them back and prevent them from expanding. They try to figure out what they're doing to meddle in the mortal world and thwart it in the underworld. So there's this massive, massive military down there that's designed to keep the Infernals from taking over the place.
And I also feel like a lot of the soldiers act as like envoys. So for instance, if you have a mortal that just slips through one of the pockets and just finds itself in the underworld lost before it ends up passing on or gets abducted by a fiend, you have these sentries that are on patrols and they will find them and lead them back where they belong. Or if it's too late, induct them into service.
Exactly. They basically ensure to protect the natural order of the underworld. And because the fiends, the Infernals, were not killed, they were merely imprisoned, and they have their own armies, and they're individually very powerful themselves in the underworld. Like, if you're between domains, you're just in the underworld proper, it's a bad place. Not only are you constantly having your life energy leached away from you, but your random encounters are mostly going to be fiends and the undead and the occasional elemental. You're going to have, rampaging groups of demons that are just hunting for sweet, sweet life energy to feed on. They may or may not be affiliated with an infernal. You're going to have souls, deserters from Ramius' army, who are the undead. Souls that just got lost along the way and are craving, again, to drain the life from you so that they can feel alive again. It's just dangerous. It's
kind of jumping on top of that. I feel like, kind of like you described, there's kind of 2 layers to the underworld. You have the old city of Essence that is the Foundry, and then you kind of have the city that was built on top of that. Like, there's a lot of places around the world where they'll have like this undercity that is like, oh yeah, fell into it's sunk into the swamp, or it got really bad and we just built right on top of it. I feel like that's a lot of what's going on in the underworld. Like you mentioned, you might see an elemental here and there. I feel like for the most part, things that how they were are like deep down and lower, and you really have to traverse through the overland of the underworld in order to get down into the depths of what it used to be. And like you said, you'll see things like just raw elementals. You'll see mephits. You'll see beings that kind of straddle the line between being neutral or evil creatures. But for the most part, like you said, it's going to be undead and fiends that are going to be roaming around. You kind of answered my question a moment ago, but how do you feel about the typing of the servants of Ramius, the soldiers? I feel like they're probably undead. They might fall into the realm of what we talked about for spirits, but I feel like they're probably just straight up either corporal or incorporeal undead.
I feel like you could stat them out either as undead, but with turning immunity of some kind, or you could stat them out as neutral fiends, really.
I think I prefer the undead portion, but yeah, I think you're right.
Like,
I think
because we talked about the existence, the possibility of neutral or even good fiends, and if we're gonna say that fiends aren't necessarily evil, then what makes a fiend a fiend? It might just be that connection to the underworld.
It could be.
I'm not sold on either, just because I don't think that a mace of disruption or holy water should harm the minions of the armies of Ramius. So I'm a little bit.
Some kind of immunity would work for that. You're right. I do like the idea of having, much like how Ramius has deserters. I don't see why you wouldn't have deserters from the infernal ranks. You have fiends that don't want any part of this. They want to make sure that they can either re-enter the cycle themselves. They're in a way, the fiends are kind of trapped in their like how we talked about there's no soul trapping, but in a way, certain beings that are either super long lived or undying, they don't get to return to the cycle until their existence comes to an end. And either
Mhm.
they weren't part of it in the first place, kind of like the sovereigns, or they were only remotely a part of it. They kind of are it.
Yeah,
Uh,
the sovereigns I see as being part of the biggest, slowest turning wheel of the cycle, whereas mortals
yeah,
are like they turn over faster. Anyways, go on.
I was just gonna say I agree with you, and I think you hit the nail on the head. I think you have a mixture of both fiends and undead. I feel like the true born or the true dead spirits that go to the underworld would be classified as just an almost untyped undead, whereas you would have, I think, fiendish entities within Ramius's ranks, but I think those are like the traitors and deserters of the infernal hordes, or just fiends that just found their way down there and had no allegiance in the first place.
Agreed. We got a couple of questions from chat. If Uzul and friends got an unprecedented inflow of followers and were able to break through the adamant gates and conquer the city, could they reverse the Ramius changes? No, because the Ramius changes were not predicated on his status of being in the underworld or having that kingdom. His changes were predicated by whatever mysterious shit he did to the Emerald Tablets themselves. So if Uzul conquered the Kingdom of Shadows, it would be a bad thing. It would absolutely be a very bad thing. They could probably just harness unprecedented amounts of life energy because they would be, sort of in between the flow of the dead and the recycling of the universe. And they could use that to harness unprecedented amounts of energy and maybe blow up the firmament. But that would require additional knowledge on their part. It wouldn't change the fact that the universe is now coded the way it is. But they could probably kill the world,
Which is a huge reason why Uzul and other Infernals are doing what they can,
Mm-hmm.
being trapped down in the underworld to try and unlock the secrets of the Emerald Tablet. Again, it's very difficult from where they are because they're basically locked in a hole. But that's one of the reasons why mortal agents are so very, very, very important for them.
I think one of the other things that makes it difficult for the Infernals to understand the Emerald Tablets is the fact that
They're not a part of Anacra.
You nailed it. They're not a part. They're not originally from this universe. Whereas Ramius is, he's a Titan. He was born of Anacra, and so the Emerald Tablets they're basically the manifestation of the laws that the sovereigns used when they put the four kingdoms together and divided the Dawn. But even the sovereigns didn't totally understand what they were doing. Right? It's not like they had a complete, perfect understanding. They got these things in motion, but there was a lot of what we call emergent gameplay or unforeseen interactions. They don't fully understand what they themselves have created. It's so much more complex.
We talked about so much is automated. When they were brought into existence, there was an entity that just said, "Look, life needs to happen. Go make it so, but don't get too involved." And that's what happened.
Yeah.
So, I think intrinsically, that's one of the reasons why the sovereigns don't work together as well as they probably could, is that just at their core, they almost aren't meant to. They have their own domains, they have their own responsibilities, and they fulfill those. And it's almost like it's hardwired into them that they need to work together, but at arm's reach,
Yeah. Like a lot of Anacra is it's automated. Or at least it's operating under the influence of incredibly powerful supernatural laws that govern them. Mortals, absolutely. And that's where like mortals, they're limited by natural law, but they have a lot more agency than, like, the higher you get in the supernatural rankings, the less agency you have, with the exception of the Infernals to a certain degree. There was also a question about, would that immunity for Ramius's armies work differently in the underworld versus if those soldiers ended up above? I would say Ramius's rank and file soldiers literally cannot leave the underworld. Like, they just can't. A deserter from Ramius's armies could, but a deserter would arise under very unusual circumstances because you should have been purged of all of your desire to desert and everything else by passing through the 5 rivers of the underworld in the first place.
I feel like almost in a way, in order to be much like how the fiends, if you get a fiend in the service of Ramius, they're a deserter. It's almost like the deserters of Ramius have to be, in a way, either tainted or in the service to an infernal or other fiendish presence. They are led astray from their goal, and they're twisted, and either they're given a spark of just what they had amongst them, like it's
it doesn't have to be evil, right? It could be
sorrow, whatever it is,
memory, any
Something
positive
to attach
emotion. Yeah.
Exactly. It makes them cling and want to go to the world. And I think those beings, those are the undead you see wandering the mortal
Mm-hmm.
plane. They are not fiends. They're not bound by the rule that was set upon them by Ramius's undoing. And so the Infernals will take the soldiers of Ramius, tempt them, make promises, or just find them, torture them, and force them, and then send them up into the overworld to
Mm-hmm.
wreak havoc and make horror upon the mortal realm.
And there are other ways that the undead can arise. Obviously, necromantic magic can do that, but you've also got some natural occurrences. You've got your, ghost with unfinished business. And usually what happens then is, under the normal process, that person would die, and then their soul and life energy would pass to the underworld to go through the 5 rivers for processing. But that step gets interrupted by the sheer emotional weight, the emotional energy of whatever it is that they feel is unfinished business. Same with a lot of other types of undead. You've also got, like, if somebody dies and then before they cross over the 5 rivers, for some reason they're like, I'm gonna go, and they leave and they make it back to the mortal world. That could be a ghost or a specter or something else. But usually, because those entities are somewhere they don't belong, a lot of them have to feed on life energy because they're constantly feeling the pull of the grave of the underworld to pull them back down. Like the cycle's trying to keep doing its thing, and in order to push upstream, they have to eat other people's vital energy, which is where you get a lot of different types of undead. It's not a one size fits all. There are other reasons for it, but generally they're escaped souls, blocked souls, or necromantically raised entities of some sort.
Absolutely. We don't have time for it right now, but I would like to get into more of ECAT's question about what would really happen if an Infernal like Uzul had launched an assault that was successful
Mm-hmm.
against the City of Shadow. I feel like there's just so much that's built in for that. We would need to explore, like you kind of went over what could possibly happen.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like much like everything else, there's a lot of fail safes.
Yeah.
Like Ramius wouldn't leave it as part of it, like, oh, if they conquer me, then everything's fine and they get to do what they like. I feel like there's a lot of things that would, first of all, there's a lot that would happen if there was ever something like that happening. There again, the powers that be would likely probably band together and figure something out. But I really feel like there's only so much that the fiends can do, even if they did somehow get in control of, the adamant gates and the pools that lead there.
I mean, ultimately, the goal of the Infernals is to reconstitute Anacra back to the Dawn world so that they can just control it, eat all of its energy in that form, and make it their own, reshape it in their own image. So
I feel like if Ramius ever got overthrown, that the other powers, the other titans or the sovereigns would band together, and they would probably try to, either by messing with the source code or by just doing their own form of rewriting, and they would probably put something to where the souls that normally would be going to Ramius and would pass through the adamant gates instead skip the overworld of the underworld and just go straight into the foundry, and they just go right back into the old cycle. That you would basically give the overworld of the underworld to the fiends, and
they can have it.
It becomes a no zone. It's like, okay, well, we tried Ramius, it was a good show, but you know what? You tried it your way. Now let's go back to how things were, because it's not working, man.
The one thing I can say is that failsafes or not, it would suck. Like, it would still, it would make the world a worse place, right? Like, it may not be, it's not like Uzul would be like, now that I've conquered the Kingdom of Shadows, I win. But it would still be a devastating, bad thing that would change the universe for the worst, and it would advance Uzul's goals, even if he still found a million blockers in his way afterwards.
I mean, here's the thing that I would think. I don't think that he can pass through the adamant gates. I don't think any fiends should be able to, or at least where that area is. Again, there's a lot that goes into it, but from what I'm thinking, on the purest fact, if nothing was changed, all of those souls that are going down there and that are not being petitioned by other gods, actually, that's probably what would happen. You probably have the other deities that would just petition for every soul. Like, nope. Because if you didn't, they'd be going straight to Uzul, and Uzul would be forcibly otherwise or making deals, turn these souls into undead, and everything that died, almost like Dawn of the Dead, everything that died would come back as an undead if it was left unchecked.
The other thing I could see is he can't pass through the adamant gates, right? They're forbidden to fiends, but with sufficient energy, he could tear them from their hinges. But
even if he did, he couldn't leave the underworld.
Right, because that's the thing, is the emerald tablets still bind him to the underworld, but he could become incredibly powerful and, you know, just set up soul siphons to feed himself and grow stronger and stronger and stronger, and send forth his malevolent influence and start to, you know, try to send it all the way to the depths of the elements themselves to cause the world to die and all sorts of bad stuff. But unless he found a way to edit the tablets, he'd still be trapped.
Oh yeah. And beyond that, I feel like again, he's just a numbers game is not good for him. There's every soul that passes through Anacra either
Mhm.
gets petitioned for or goes to Ramius, and only a very small amount can he actually either defeat or turn to his side.
Mhm.
So and unless he's actually pooling people that are not dying or that he's not eating from the
Mhm.
overworld to be his servants, he's getting just the economy is just not in his favor for that to
Right.
happen,
Well,
you know?
that's why the scenario that posited was if he successfully overthrows the Kingdom of Shadows,
Yes.
then I think he sets himself up to
Oh,
benefit
yeah.
from the soul economy. And
Oh
then,
no, absolutely.
like you
Yeah.
said, that's when other powers start to interfere. But the problem is that the flow of souls is one of the things that is hard coded into the Emerald tablets. So it would turn into Uzul and friends have the majority of the supply, and everyone else is diverting from that stream. So yeah, they would divert harder, but it still wouldn't be the main flow, right? Like,
Oh yeah, I don't think you would ever get enough people to because I feel you only have so many of these powerful beings, and there's so much going down there
mhm.
that you can only put so many dams or dividers. Now, again, I feel like what you would probably have would be another entity, much like Ramius did. Even if they didn't go for the tablets, they go, okay, I'm now going to become the domain of the shepherd, and I am making
Mhm.
my entire thing about grabbing people and making sure they do not go there. We take
Running
it
an
straight to the
underground railroad for souls to help them
yes.
sneak through the underworld to the wellspring. Yeah, that's totally what you'd have. But it would
Or you'd have like the Fey Lords capturing the souls and making sure they stay permanently in the Feywild.
yeah.
They would stay in the other world rather than go to the underworld. Things like
Mhm.
that. You'd
Yeah.
have a lot of fail safes, whether it was actually planned or not.
Right. So it wouldn't be like Uzul would get all the like he would absolutely benefit, but his
Oh, yeah.
benefits would be tapped in every possible way by everyone who had the ability to do so.
But like you said, I feel like if everything went his way and all his plans came to fruition, could he probably destroy the world? Yeah, probably. But would he still be trapped in this destroyed realm? Absolutely. And that's not good.
He would
And
need to shatter the firmament itself in order to truly escape. I do think one way he could work on that would be to gain total control of all the souls of the dead and start fucking with the wellspring. Like that's a good way to break the firmament. I don't know if he'd pull it off immediately, but that's a good like if Uzul was a PC in my campaign and he wanted to do that, I'd be like, I mean, that's possible. You know, it's not a bad place to start, is sort of how I'd approach it.
oh yeah.
I think that's going to be it for today. That's our lunch hour has come and gone, and it's time for us to resume our other deeds. But thank you, chat, as always. I don't know what our next topic is, but we'll announce it. We'll talk about it offline. We'll hash that out. Have a happy and safe Halloween, everybody. Matt, any closing thoughts, remarks, anything?
Go Ramius, man.
Yes.
Praise be to the overseer to ensure that the souls of the damned and otherwise aren't just made infernal fodder.
Yeah. The souls of the dead are not the souls of the damned. Praise the overseer.
And happy Halloween.
Indeed. Bye, everybody.